Just live coming at you on a Tuesday evening here from Columbus, Ohio. I'm your host, Chase Brown, senior producer at 11 Warriors. I'm joined here tonight, as always, by Dan Hope, our deputy editor, and then Andy Anders, our reporter. He covers basketball, he covers football, he does it all for us, Andy Anders. He is wearing tonight, not actually wearing tonight, his Cincinnati Bengals garb, but he is rooting for the Cincinnati Reds tonight in their matchup with the Pittsburgh Pirates. I've got my Cleveland Guardians hat on and supporting them against the Tigers. It's a great night for sports in Ohio, but we're going to talk about some Ohio State football coverage tonight. Before we get into all that, I just want to know, you guys are going out to Washington this weekend. Have you ever been to Washington? Have you ever been to Seattle? Are you looking forward to being there this weekend, Dan? What's your experience going out west?
You tricked me. I started shaking my head no, and it's like, "Are you looking forward to be there?" I was still shaking my
Yeah,
head. No, no. I
yeah.
have not been to Washington. I am looking forward to going to Washington this weekend. Last year, Oregon was my first trip to the Pacific Northwest. Got a little kind of close to the Washington border up in Portland, but have not actually been to Washington State. So definitely excited to check it out. I've heard good things from people who have been there. So yeah, really looking forward to it.
Andy, what's your experience out in Seattle? You ever been there, and are you looking forward to it this weekend?
I too have not been there. I haven't been to the Pacific Northwest in general, whether that's Washington, Oregon, or even Northern California. I have been to Southern California. We've been to obviously the Rose Bowl, but for me, like I've always seen pictures of that region and always wanted to go check it out. I'm hoping we get to explore Seattle a little bit. We'll see if we get a chance to. Um, might be tough. Just it's going to be 12:30 p.m. local time the game, so we'll see. But either
Friday
way, I
night.
am either way I am very excited to see that part of this country. Um, I know how beautiful Seattle is and how beautiful this stadium is going to be. And I love college football atmospheres and rock and loud environments more than anything. They're purported to have one of the loudest in the country. Some uh, content podcasts I've listened to about it, like back that up, say it's one of the loudest places to play in college football, despite not being the largest stadium. But Autzen last year, Dan can attest, not the largest stadium, gets really, really loud. So one of those, and I'm very excited to take in that environment, if nothing else. And if we get a chance to explore Seattle, hopefully explore Seattle.
Well, there's a little known coffee shop out there called Starbucks. I think you guys need to make some time to try it. I've heard it's pretty good. But yeah, before we move on to Ohio State sports for this episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. It is the official bank of 11 Warriors. First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners of Central Ohio. It's locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. First Bank of Central Ohio. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. So we're going to start here. The West Coast has provided some woes for any team that travels from the Eastern or Central time zones. Dan, you actually wrote an article on this very topic coming out of Ryan Day's press conference on Tuesday. But since the start of the 2024 season, Big Ten teams from the Eastern and Central time zone are 3-13 in regular season games played in the Pacific time zone. The last non-West Coast Big Ten team to win came on October 12th, 2024. It was actually Penn State over USC and Minnesota over UCLA. Teams are 0-7 since then, including 0-2 in 2025. Ohio State is among those teams that lost. We mentioned briefly Ohio State's trip to Autzen last fall, when they fell 32-31 to Oregon. But Dan, you're kind of leading expert of us three, given the article that you wrote. What's going on with this West Coast woes, and what does it seem to be, or why is it an issue for teams traveling out there and the lack of success that they have had?
Well, I think it's just tough. I mean, you got to travel across the country. You've got to adjust, in Ohio State's case and teams that are on the Eastern time zone, you've got to adjust, three different time zones playing in the game. And so, I think that's a tough adjustment. I mean, playing on the road is more challenging than playing it at home itself. And when you have a longer trip, it's more to acclimate to. That said, I do think that Ryan Day and Ohio State are taking the right approach to it this year. I remember last year, Ohio State flew out to Oregon on Friday, and there was a lot of talk about Buckeye time. Oh, we're gonna stay on Buckeye time the whole week, and it really meant Eastern time. But it was like he kept like banging that drum all week of like, we're not gonna change our routine at all. Like, we're just going to do it. Like, it's being overblown, this idea that traveling to the West Coast is something that we need to change our routine for. And I think they learned from the college football playoff and the success they had there, particularly against Oregon in the rematch in the Rose Bowl, another West Coast game, that having extra time to get acclimated was a benefit for Ohio State on those road trips. So because of that, they're going out on Thursday instead of Friday. That way they can be there all day Friday. They have all day Friday to get acclimated to the time change. They'll do their best Fridays in football and all their, last day of game prep out there. And I think that's a good approach to kind of make it less hurried in terms of like, you're traveling Friday, you got to play a game the next day. I think especially with it being a 12:30 local time game. Last year was a little bit different with it being a night game or really a late afternoon game there. But with it being, a 12:30 local time kick, if they flew on Friday, you don't have a lot of turnaround time between flying out there and then playing the game. So I think it's a smart approach to be flying out there Thursday. And while Ryan Day said, when I asked him about it, he said, we don't think that was why we lost at Oregon a year ago. And I mean, I don't think it was either. I mean, if not for a controversial offensive pass interference call against Jeremiah Smith, very good chance Ohio State wins that game. So it's not like Ohio State played bad in that game. I mean, the defense wasn't great in that game, and it led to a lot of changes that ultimately led to a national championship for Ohio State. But I would agree with him. I don't think that's the reason why they lost a year ago, but I do think the changes they are making this year are smart changes in terms of giving Ohio State the best chance to be successful on Saturday.
And there's another factor to this too, and this is something that has been, a role or I guess a storyline going into Ohio State's 2025 season is how many guys they lost from last season's championship team. You had 14 guys drafted, you had 17 guys that ended up signing with NFL rosters in some capacity. You had a number of transfers who left the program that had some veteran experience, and so you're bringing a team on their first road trip right now all the way across the country. It's not like they're taking a short flight to Bloomington or to West Lafayette or even going to Chicago. They're going all the way across the country to Seattle. And so you want to remove as many obstacles or as many potential for hiccups as you can, right? You don't want to giving yourself enough time to get these guys acclimated and to figure out what it looks like to play on the road. There's so many different factors for a game day Saturday for Ohio State than what they're used to at this point because they've played 3 straight home games. And so I think that is a significant factor into it as well. Ohio State is going to look to kind of kick that trend of Big Ten teams going out west and not having success, but it's not going to come easy, right? But Washington is undefeated through 4 weeks in the season, and they have plenty of playmakers. Ryan Day has been, and Matt Patricia have both been very, very high on quarterback Damon Williams Jr. He is Washington's X factor in this game. Both Patricia and Day have highlighted his speed, his elusiveness, his strong arm. They've compared him to Kyler Murray. They say he's lightning in a bottle. Williams has been productive so far in 2025. He's thrown for almost 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's also ran for 220 yards and 2 more scores. Andy, we have the way that Patricia and Day talk about him. How do you talk about Williams, and what are you expecting from him in this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great quarterback, or has been this year so far. Really emerged at the end of last season, taking over for Will Rogers, who was a multi-year starter both at Mississippi State and then after he transferred to Washington. This is a guy who came in with a lot of hype as a freshman, delivered on it at the end of last year, and this year has taken that next step forward. I think you look at the accuracy of his passes, the decision making. You mentioned 6 touchdowns, no interceptions yet. And this is a huge step up in competition for Washington. Obviously, the schedule hasn't exactly been a bunch of world beaters so far. Colorado State, UC Davis, and then Washington State, who isn't as good as they've been in previous years. I think you're taking a huge step up in the competition with this defense. But having said that, I mean, accurate passes are accurate passes. I said it about Julian Say, and I'll say it now about Damon Williams, 73.8% through the air, and a real dual threat on the ground. That's the Kyler Murray analogy. That's where it comes in when these coaches talk about Damon Williams, the ability to extend plays and make dangerous stuff happen out of the pocket, but also present that extra body, that extra threat in the running game, right? You make Caden Curry frees at defensive end when it's a zone read, and he's not going to be able to crash down on the running back. You have to maybe take an extra defender out of it. Now, I will say, this is the year I think I've felt the most confident in Ohio State defending a mobile quarterback that I ever have. And that's saying a lot early, but the reason is Arvell Reese. And what he does in the open space, how fast he is, how sure he's looked at as a tackler, just the physical monstrosity that he is. Um, what he does for this defense in terms of limiting mobile quarterbacks, you saw it against Parker Navarro, who was knocked out for a quarter of that game, a little hampered, but whenever they had Arvell Reese assigned to him as a spy, he kept him contained and didn't let him go anywhere. I mean, he had 3 yards on 5 carries. So that tells you a lot about what Arvell is doing for this defense, the different roles they can put him in. And I think spying him is going to limit a lot of what Williams can do with his feet. To me, that's a key. Keep him in the pocket. The offensive line has allowed a lot of sacks over the last few seasons, so hopefully you can get pressure if you keep him in the pocket or when he escapes, Arvell's on him. Um, to me, I think that's going to be really important in this game for Ohio State because he does have weapons to throw to, namely Denzel Boston. And as good as Ohio State's secondary is, you give a guy extra time, someone's going to get open. So uh, that to me, keep him in the pocket, limit what he can do with his legs, have Arvell Reese on him like a fly on stink, and should be successful in limiting Washington's offense more than other teams have.
As Andy mentioned, he has some weapons, Damon Williams does, and get to Denzel Boston in a second, but let's start with the guy who stands right next to him in the backfield. I'll go to you, Dan, with Jonah Coleman. He's Washington's top running threat. He averages 6.8 yards per carry with 300 and almost 350 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns through 3 games. Those touchdowns lead the nation in terms of rushing scores. He's also dangerous as a receiver coming out of the backfield. He's Washington's second leading receiver behind Boston with 8 catches for 150 yards in the score. Jonah Coleman, what do you expect from him coming into this matchup, and what are the ways that Washington will look to get him involved on Saturday?
Yeah, they're going to look to get him involved a lot. I mean, you just look at what he's done as both a runner and a receiver. This is a guy who they give a lot of touches to. They use him a lot in both the running and the passing game. And right now, I would say he's the top running back in the Big Ten. I mean, I think that particularly if that well-rounded skill set, he's maybe not like a burner necessarily, but he's a guy who's he's strong, he's powerful, really good in the passing game. And so, yeah, I think Jonah Coleman, you pair him with that running threat of Damon Williams. That's what makes this running game so dangerous is you got a really good running back, and then you've got a very, very quick quarterback who can be dynamic with his legs. And that's what's going to make them, so tough to defend. And I think, I just look at that trio in general of Damon Williams Jr., Jonah Coleman, and Denzel Boston. I mean, I think you could make a case for that trio being as good as any team has in the country right now in terms of quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I mean, you guys might remember when I did my preseason all Big Ten team, I had all 3 of them on there. I think you guys were kind of like, really? Damon Williams Jr.? But I think he's showing a lot of what I expected. I think Julian Sainz certainly putting himself in that all Big Ten quarterback race. Fernando Mendoza from Indiana certainly putting himself in that all Big Ten race of a performance he had against Illinois. But I've seen from all 3 of these guys what I really expected to see this year. And that's why, this is one of those games that I've had circled, since the offseason is one of those sneaky games for Ohio State, because I do think just in terms of that, their kind of big 3, so to speak, I think that big 3 is as good as any team has in the country.
Yeah, Denzel Boston is a receiver that, he would probably be a wide receiver 1 at every program except Ohio State and maybe Alabama. He's one of those guys. He's 6'4", 210 pounds. This guy is big. And, Ryan Day was even asked a question at today's press conference. Does Ohio State have the size in its secondary to be able to defend a guy like him out wide? But through this point, he has 16 receptions for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns in 2025. He's using his size and his speed to win contested passes from Damon Williams. And then he's also shown this production over time, right? He came into this season in 2024. He had 63 catches for 834 yards and 9 scores in 2024. So he is a consistent threat that Williams can look to on the outside, and somebody that I'm sure is going to get the lion's share of the targets whenever Damon Williams drops back to pass. Andy, I want to go to you with this one. What have you seen from Boston? And can Ohio State's secondary contend with him with its size and with its speed and length outside?
A lot of what you said from Denzel Boston. It's the length. I mean, just watching highlights of Williams, Boston connecting on their passes. He wins a lot of contested catches. Like he knows how to use his body to shield off defenders. Good at high pointing the football, and when you combine that with someone who's very tall, Jeremiah Smith has the same advantage. Like when you are good at high pointing and you're tall, I mean, it's kind of the perfect combo to win those 50-50 balls, as they're called. Uh, I think that is where he excels in a lot of those areas. To me, like Ohio State does have a long cornerback in Davis Igbinosun, as Ryan Day pointed out. Boston has a couple of inches on him, but it's going to be about staying in phase with him, making those passes difficult, and Caleb Downs being back there at safety doesn't hurt your odds either. If I'm Ohio State's secondary, frankly, I think you also maybe do what a lot of teams do to Jeremiah, make someone else beat you, right? This Washington's number 2 receiver after Denzel Boston is Jonah Coleman out of the backfield. They haven't had as many threats emerge outside of Boston in the passing game. Those guys, maybe you double Denzel and see what those other guys can do, right? If I'm Ohio State, it's priority one in the pass game to take Denzel Boston away and force other people to beat me. To me, I think that's got to be the plan when you just look at the numbers. And hey, like I said, other guys might emerge for Washington, but you got to make someone else beat you.
And what would you guys say is the matchup to watch in the battle between Washington's offense and Ohio State's defense? Are we looking at something where it's Caden Curry and Bo Atkinson and Kenyatta Jackson coming off the edge? Is it Caden McDonald and Edric Houston and Taiwan Malone coming through the middle? Is it those linebackers, the secondary? Dan, what's the matchup to watch right now going into the weekend between Washington's offense and Ohio State's defense?
Well, I think Andy already highlighted a great one in Davison Igbinosun versus Denzel Boston. Just the size that Davison has, I think he's going to be really key to that matchup. So I think that's certainly a big one to watch. He mentioned Arvell Reese. I think Arvell Reese as that spy, his ability to stop the quarterback run game is going to be huge. But I think the big one for me is going to be the Ohio State pass rush versus the Washington offensive line. Because that's my biggest question of this Washington offense is, I'm still not sure how good their offensive line is. And a lot of that's because they haven't really played anybody. Like their numbers have been good in the first few games of the season, but I think back to the end of last year, I think the Oregon game, I think Damon Williams got sacked like 8 or 9 times. And Washington has not played another team yet this year with the defensive line talent, the pass rush talent to give them a true matchup game on the offensive line. So I think that is a potential advantage for Ohio State, that if they can exploit that, if Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, Bo Atkinson, CJ Hicks, a lot of those guys you named, Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, however they choose to use those guys. I think if Ohio State can get consistent pressure on Damon Williams Jr., that's going to be that's what gives them the best chance of really slowing down, shutting down this Washington offense.
Yeah, I had those numbers going into this season for the 11 Warriors schedule preview, that in Williams' 2 starts last season, he took 15 sacks in just 153 dropbacks. So that's almost a sack. Well, that is a sack on 10% of his dropbacks. A pretty astonishing number. And then through 3 starts this fall, he's been sacked 6 times on 91 dropbacks. So it's a better number, a better percentage. But as you mentioned, Dan, there just hasn't been the level of competition that Williams faced last season when he was starting in those final couple of games for Washington. That's going to be a matchup I'm looking for as well, is going to be that trenches. And I think that this is an opportunity where, the old adage is that defense travels, right? That you are going to be able to play with a certain energy and an intensity on the defensive side of the football, that you are able to run downhill and smash into running lanes. And I'm really looking at Caden McDonald to continue this emergence that he's had through the start of the 2025 season. I've loved his attitude too. When he was coming into the year and he was referring to himself as Slim Mac rather than K Mac, and some of the muscle that he's put on in the offseason in Coach Mick's program, he has been a game wrecker on the interior. And he's somebody that I'm looking forward to seeing the way that he responds each time that Jonah Coleman gets the football and tries to run it up the middle. Can Ohio State make Washington one-dimensional in this football game in terms of handing the football off? There's always going to be that threat that Williams could escape the pocket and run for some yards, but is Ohio State able to limit Coleman's ability to run up the middle, to maybe hit the edges, and to get some explosive plays? So want to move here. Washington's offense is lightning in a bottle for Williams leading it, but the defense is certainly not thunder. Right. This defense has shown some weaknesses. It's been the team's maybe chink in the armor through the first few weeks that the Washington defense struggled in 2024. It ranked outside the top 50 in scoring defense and outside the top 25 in total defense. They lost some playmakers last season. And then they come back this year. Through 3 games, they haven't really looked dominant. Washington State had some success passing the ball against them. The Cougars quarterback had completed almost 70% of his passes for almost 300 yards, and he had 2 scores. So what are maybe the ways of the who, what, where, when, why, and how that Ohio State can exploit this defense? Andy, I want to start with you. What are the kind of matchups that you're looking for Ohio State's offense going against Washington's defense going into the weekend?
It's like you said, I think these receivers versus the secondary. I mean, we know Ohio State's receivers are the best in college football, have been for years. I think Carnell Tate, Dan would agree, has said it multiple times before me. Carnell Tate's got a good chance to be a first round pick in this year's NFL draft. Jeremiah Smith is a future top 5 pick, probably. You've got so much talent in this receiver room in a Washington secondary. Not only have they had struggles recently, but they are without one of their best corners in Tocario Davis, probably heading into this game after he was injured. So they have areas to exploit for this Ohio State offense. And I think Ryan Walters, Washington's defensive coordinator, former Purdue head coach, some people might recognize that name, runs a lot of man coverage. And to me, anytime that you're putting these receivers against man coverage, they're just winning the matchups. One-on-one, Brian Hartline coaches them to be some of the best route runners in the country. They know how to get separation. Jeremiah, I think anytime he's gone against a man-heavy scheme has had a big day. The only time that people have really limited him is zone-heavy defenses like Texas did. So to me, that's a big advantage for Ohio State, and that's the matchup I'm looking at is this secondary for Washington that's not only unproven but had a recent struggle, might be without one of its top cornerbacks. I think that's a big area for Ohio State to exploit. And I think they've done a good job, too, getting creative to get their weapons out wide involved. A lot of good screen game actions, a lot of motion, moving Jeremiah around the offense. Saw him score that touchdown on the reverse. I don't think that was a coincidence at all that they put that on film against Ohio. They're doing a lot of different things with motions and having different things coming off those motions. It's been very creative so far, and I think that will play into the hand of exploiting that matchup of Ohio State's receivers versus Washington's secondary.
Andy probably took the matchup that you and I both were thinking of, Dan, but I want to ask you this. The first question that Ryan Day was asked during his press conference on Tuesday was about Julian Sayin making his first start on the road. And Ryan Day said that he doesn't want Sayin to make any assumptions when he's on the road. It's all the little things. He says it's almost like going back to the beginning, to the fundamentals, going back to the basics, because anytime you're on the road, everything's a little bit more difficult. What do you think Ohio State can do to prepare Sayin for this road test this week? And what do you think we'll maybe see at the start of the game to get him comfortable in a hostile environment?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest questions I have going into this game because, I mean, Julian, he really didn't play on the road at all last year. I don't even remember if he did. If he did, it would have been at the very end of the game. And now you're going to make your first road start into an environment that's considered one of the best in college football. And so, first road game, first Big Ten game, in what's likely to be a loud environment for Julian Saying. How does he handle that? Now, I have confidence in his ability to handle it because of how he handled the Texas game. But as you mentioned, in the Texas game, they kept things very vanilla for Julian. So are they going to be more aggressive with Julian in this game? I would think yes, based on what we've seen the last couple of games, even if they were against lesser competition. And then how will he handle that? I think that's going to be a huge thing for Ohio State in this game because on paper, like Ohio State's offense clearly has the advantage over Washington's defense. Like Andy said, the receivers should be able to beat this secondary, especially if Takario Davis, who's questionable to play in this game, if he's not able to play, that would be a huge loss for Washington. You'd think there's going to be opportunities here for Julian Saying to make plays. Based on everything we've seen from him so far, there's reason to believe that he should be able to make them. But I do think first road game, will I be surprised if we see some early jitters, a couple early hiccups from Julian Saying? No, I won't be. And then, I think the other big thing is you talk about taking pressure off Julian. It's going to be the running game. And can they really get the running game going? Because against Texas, that was really the thing that held the offense back was they didn't really have a great running game going. And we've seen strides of that in the last couple of games, but it was against Grambling and Ohio. Now, will that translate to conference play? And your big question there is, how much Bo Jackson are we going to see? How is Ohio State going to play this in terms of its rotation? If one guy gets going, are they going to ride the hot hand, or are they going to really rotate heavily between two or three guys with, CJ Donaldson, James Peoples in there? I think one way or another, getting the run game going is going to be big to take some pressure off of Julian Saying. And of course, finishing drives in a red zone. That's the other big thing going into this game after going just 2 for 6 in the red area against Ohio. They've got to be able to finish drives in that area in this game, and the run game is going to be a huge part of that.
Well, let's go to the run game. We won't quite enter in fully to our fan questions, but this is one that's come up a couple of times in our YouTube chat. Andy, I'll ask you this question. Who of James Peoples, CJ Donaldson, Bo Jackson, which of those three will get the lion's share of the carries against Washington? And who deserves the lion's share at this point is a question from GOJ in our YouTube chat.
Yeah, I actually answered this question earlier today in our beat writer chat on 11 Warriors too. Bo Jackson's my answer, deserving and will. To me, I mean, he ended up having the most carries against Ohio, right? The coaching staff saw what he was doing, rode the hot hand, let him get more attempts. And Ryan Day has since acknowledged that he's going to get even more opportunities. He said that twice in his press conference going into the off week and his press conference coming out, that they're going to give Bo Jackson more chances to prove he deserves more carries. If he takes care of the ball, like if he fumbles early in this game, that's the only route I see for him not to get the most carries out of the backfield, because the coaches see the same things we do. They're not blind. Like, they have other concerns that they're going to put more emphasis on than a reporter or a fan: ball security, pass protection, those types of things that go into running back play besides running the football. But it's clear to anyone who's watched this team, and I think the subtext is it's clear to Ryan Day too, that Bo Jackson, in terms of just running the football, is the best they have. And he's got a different gear than the other two. So I expect them all to work in. I still expect Donaldson and Peoples to get a good number of carries in this game. I think it's going to be a three-headed monster all year, but I do think that Bo Jackson will get the lion's share. And why I say he deserves that, why I think the coaches see he deserves that, is again just that burst he has coming through the line of scrimmage, and he makes guys miss. CJ Donaldson does a good job running with power and falling forward most of the time. James Peoples, he's got some work to do on his vision and some other things, but he's had good moments. He's had good chunk runs. But I don't see either of them making guys miss in the same way Bo Jackson can. The shortcuts in space, just the 64-yard run he had against Ohio, he strips 2 arm tackles going through the middle with that extra burst that he has, makes a quick cut to make a third defender miss, and then takes off for a 64-yard gain. He's the only guy in this running back room right now who can do that. And even some of the James Peoples runs where he goes 7, 8 yards without being touched and then is tackled by a shoelace for a 12-yard gain. I'm like, I think Bo Jackson might take that to the house. And nothing against James. I think he could still be a very good back, but Bo's got that extra gear. Bo's got the moves. Bo knows. Bo just knows.
He
And
does know.
that's where I'm at with it. The other two guys will have their niche, but Bo Jackson's the guy.
Well, the running game and running backs will only be as successful as the offensive line that's blocking for them up front. And that was also something that Ryan Day addressed in his press conference on Tuesday. Was there's a question about if he's confident in the experience specifically of center Carson Hinsman in this environment, but then really Day kind of took that as is the entire offensive line ready for this experience in Seattle. And is basically his challenge to the offensive line was to lean on the experience that it has and use it as a weapon. Dan, do you have confidence in Ohio State's offensive line going into this matchup, or do you have maybe any concerns for how this offensive line can perform in its first road test?
I mean, in terms of talking like road tests, like Carson Hinsman, I mean, the guy played him a Rose Bowl, a Cotton Bowl, a national championship game. So to me, I'm like, that feels a little bit overblown to me. Like, yeah, like I think he can handle playing in like a loud environment. I mean, like his first game in the lineup last year was a Penn State game, one of the loudest games. And yeah, he wasn't the center, but like he was a revelation in that game of the way he stepped in. So, I think Carson Hinsman, Luke Montgomery, Tegra Shabola's, he's kind of a question mark on the offensive line right now because he hasn't played great this season, particularly in the Ohio game with a couple costly penalties that he had. And so I think that right guard position is a question mark, but not really in the sense of like road experience because Tegra played the whole season last year, but more just like, is he going to clean up on some of those mistakes? And if not, are we going to see more of Ethan Onionwan there? So I have a bit of a question there at that right guard spot, but I think, Carson and Luke, the experience they have from the CFP gives me confidence in their ability, going to play on the road. Austin and Phillip, not quite as experienced out there at tackle, but I mean, both those guys have been rock solid so far this season. And so, I think particularly in the run game, as you mentioned, I think that's where you want to see a little bit more out of this offensive line than we have, but they've been excellent in pass protection so far this year. And yeah, going on the road is a different challenge. Washington does have some quality pass rushers. So, it's certainly a step up from the last two games in terms of a challenge for the offensive line. But I would say overall, I feel pretty good about the offensive line going into this game.
And it seems like Ohio State has a decent plan about how they want to handle the environment. Ryan Day said on Tuesday that they plan on using a silent cadence, that they are well aware of the hostility that Washington fans can create inside Husky Stadium, and that they will be ready for what that will bring. That he really doesn't want false starts. He doesn't want Ohio State playing behind the sticks. He doesn't want Ohio State playing instead of 2nd and 5, they have to go back. It's 1st and 15, then it's 2nd and 9. Then they're playing in these positions that aren't advantageous for the offense. And so it seems like Ohio State has a decent plan about how they're going to handle the environment, especially up front. Besides that, we've talked about the wide receivers, we've talked about the quarterbacks, we've talked about the running backs and the offensive line. One position group left that we haven't discussed is Ohio State's tight end room, which has really been one of the bright spots of Ohio State's first three games, is the way that Keenan Bailey has had so many guys ready for specific spots in specific situations. And it seems like that's an area that Ohio State wants to continue expanding. Andy, I want to ask you this question. Where do you see Ohio State's tight end room maybe making an impact in this game? If Washington chooses that they want to take away Jeremiah Smith, that they want to take away Carnell Tate, is there an avenue here where Max Clare and Will Kazmarek and maybe Bennett Christian or Jelani Thurman, I could keep going. There's so many guys
Nate
that play in that position room. Nate Roberts, is there an avenue here where the tight ends end up making a significant impact in this game?
Andy, I think the question was directed to you.
Well, yeah, I think they're going to, and
I appreciate you taking the time to think about this.
They're going to,
one.
I think. They're going to, I think, really have an impact in this game as they've had the first three games. For me, I don't want to just say that's going to be in the passing game, though, right? Like the blocking of Will Kacmarek has been game changing for this offense. And that's harder to see just watching on Saturday and sitting back and taking it in, or even when you're in the stadium on game day. But he has been so sturdy in pass protection, such a grader in the run game. There's a reason they've been mixing in so much 12 personnel. Bennett Christian's been a force when he's healthy. I don't know if he'll be back in terms of being a blocker too. And then you have Claire, who's really more of the receiving threat. And yes, that pass game target potentially to go to if they're taking away Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate successfully, or if you just want to divert attention to those guys early in the game. Like we've seen in Ohio State, some of these big road environments or a big bowl game, they'll incorporate a target that you're not necessarily expecting early, whether it's because the defense is focused on other guys or if they want to make the defense think about other guys and consider these matchups. Max Clare has his route running really stands out on tape. He hasn't got as many targets, but had a really nice game against Ohio. I thought the 2 receptions he did make had a fantastic over route coming across the field to get a nice 14-yard chunk. Then obviously the 16-yard touchdown pass he had was a little more touchdown catch, not pass. He had was a little more improvisational, getting open in a scramble situation for his quarterback. Those are the types of little things that you like to see from someone who's supposed to be a big weapon in the receiving game. And so I think there will be more plan to mix him in going forward, and he is an available other option for Julian Sam. But this tight end room, its blocking is the best it's been in years, maybe the entire time I've seen covering this team, with how good Wilkes Kacmarek has been at that. Bennett Christian, even Jelani Thurman and Nate Roberts have been really proficient blockers, and I think Max Clare's gotten better too. It's a real credit to Keenan Bailey and what he's built in that room. And even if they're not, going out and catching 8 passes as a tight end room this Saturday, I think they'll have a major impact on the game as blockers.
Well, there's certainly going to be lots of matchups to continue to dive into the rest of the week and players to watch. And when we get toward Friday and Saturday, we'll start making our last call predictions, different things that we might expect to see from Ohio State and Washington in the game. But we'll leave that for the rest of the week to unfold. I want to transition, guys, into something that 11 Warriors has done for the past 2 seasons now. I guess we're going into our second season of doing the Buckeye 20, which is something exclusive that Dan has created.
Third year of it, actually, I believe.
The third year. Okay. We're going into our third season here with the Buckeye 20. It's something exclusive that 11 Warriors has done and something I've had personally a lot of fun with, creating a rankings, kind of a ranking together as our staff as seeing the top 20 players on Ohio State's roster. We had the latest release on Friday of last week coming out of Ohio State's non-conference play. There's no surprise for who's at the top of the list, right? It's Jeremiah Smith and it's Caleb Downs. But what we also see is Carnell Tate making a move into number 3, Sonny Styles dropping just 1 spot to number 4, and Arvell Reese rounding out the top 5 there. Guys, I want to ask you about this Buckeye 20 and just some of the ways that this has shaped up. Dan, when you were kind of getting people's answers and collecting everything together, was there any surprises on the Buckeye 20 that came when you made the list? Was there any any name that came into the fold that surprised you out of non-conference play?
I think the top 20, were the 20 that I expected. I know that on my personal ballot, the players who finished in the final 20 were that 20, not in the exact same order, but it was those same 20 players. So I do feel like the staff collectively picked the right players. I thought, I thought like the top 5 was pretty clear in the voting in terms of who those 5 guys were. Everybody had Jeremiah, Caleb 1, 2. There was a little more movement toward Caleb Downs. I think out of our 8 voters, 5 people had Jeremiah Smith at number 1. 3 had Caleb Downs. I know our Kyle Jones has been banging the drum since the preseason that Caleb Downs is Ohio State's best player, and he got a couple more people on his side. We all collectively decided Jeremiah Smith number 1. I mean, it's splitting hairs to a degree here for sure because you're talking about, in my opinion, the 2 best players in college football. So you could go either way. I don't think there's a wrong answer there in terms of who's 1 and who's 2, but I think they are very clearly number 1 and number 2. And then, I think that there's kind of an interesting debate there, I think, with 3, 4, and 5, because I think, I know how Andy voted, and you could definitely make the case for Arvell Reese being ahead of Sonny Styles, even being as high as 3 on this Buckeye 20, with how well he through these first 2 games as
It's a light falling.
somebody makes a mess over here. Chase getting a little
Stage
rowdy.
lights falling. I'm okay. No workers comp. No workers comp.
Man, Chase getting a little rowdy here as I talk about Arvell Reese. But
Yeah.
I will say, to Andy, I think Andy is of the belief that Arvell Reese at 5 right now will ultimately continue his move up the rankings based on what we've seen from him for 3 games.
Yeah, and I would agree. Andy, I'll let you talk about some of the surprises on your top 20, but I just want to say that Arvell Reese's rise has been not necessarily surprising to me, but definitely seeing him emerge into a top 5 spot is something that um, I wasn't necessarily expecting so quickly. I would have thought that Arvell Reese would take some time to kind of rise to being one of Ohio State's top players, but his athleticism is something to marvel at. I think the way that Ohio State has used him and Matt Patricia has used him this season has been something that has been very impressive to me. So to see him in the top 5 was kind of my surprise, and I would tack on to your comments there, Dan. Andy, is there any surprise in this top 20 that you've seen or that you see here that you would want to discuss?
Surprises, I don't think really. For me, I was surprised to see Sonny Styles ahead of Arvell Reese. And to continue that point, I guess, continue talking about Arvell Reese. Like, to me, I really had a debate between him and Carnell for number 3. I ended up putting Arvell at number 3. To me, both those guys are going to get drafted in April, May, the NFL draft. And I think Arvell is ultimately going to go higher than Sonny does, which I know isn't everything, but this guy is one of the greatest physical specimens, monsters that I have seen in an Ohio State uniform. And that's saying something on a team full of freaks like Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. But just the way he just knocks back offensive linemen with 50, 60 pounds on him because of how quick and how strong he is. The speed to chase down Parker Navarro in the open field, all the different ways they've deployed him on defense off the edge in the B gap, traditional off ball linebacker, of course. He does so much. I think it doesn't always shine through in his interviews. He's a pretty reserved guy in interviews when you talk to him, but really intelligent on the football field. Like, to handle all of those responsibilities, still have the discipline again to be a successful quarterback spy when you're able to do all these other things and just run over guys and go make big plays. Like, he knows when to turn it on, has a great nose for the football, but also knows how to play disciplined. I've just been so impressed with him through these 3 games, and I don't think the production is going to slow at all because when you have that combination of physical gifts and football IQ, it's going to bear out consistent results for you. And he's the number 1 tackler on the team. I couldn't speak enough on Arvell Reese. For me, like, the top 6 was clear. You talk about the top 5, but the 6th guy too, Caden McDonald, uh, ended up very close to the rest of the top 5 in the voting you see there. Caden McDonald has been so productive at nose guard. You don't see a nose guard. I think it's 14 tackles for him through 3 games.
Yep.
That's a ridiculous number. Like, nose guard's job normally is to take on a double team. You're getting hit by the center. You're getting hit by the guard every run play, and you're setting up other people to make tackles and make plays. But Cade McDonald, when you go that extra mile and you have the ability, like Devon Hamilton, or these other nose guards that have played for Ohio State, been great recently. Ty Hamilton at some of his peaks, maybe. But when you have that ability to not only take on huge blockers, but to then go make the play yourself, that's another level. And Caden's done that. He's gotten really good pressure, I think, in pass rush, which is, again, hard to do as a nose guard that big, but has a sack, really good pressure rates, I think. And he's just been so impressive. For me, it was the top 6 was pretty clear cut, and then I put Julian at number 7, the same as he is in the rankings, because He's been really impressive, and I could see him continuing to climb, especially if he gets a Heisman campaign going here, which is not out of the realm of possibility. But to me, like that 6 was pretty clear cut, and my only surprise really at the top of the rankings was seeing Sonny ahead of Arvell.
And you look at it too, a pretty big gap in the voting after Julian Sand. Like
Yeah.
it was 19 points between Carnell in third and Julian in seventh. It was 21 points between Julian in seventh and Caden in eighth. So I think you're very true. I mean, some people had Caden McDonald third on their ballots, and I can't argue with that. Like I think he's been that good that you could make a case for him being Ohio. I think you could make a case for any of those 4 guys: Carnell, Sonny, Arvell, or Cade. You could make a case for any of them being Ohio State's third best player. And that was reflected in the voting as they all got third place votes. And then, Julian, I think, is right on the cusp of that conversation as well. And, another guy, Caden Curry, worth mentioning as well, because he wasn't even in the top 20 when we started the season. He's now up to 8th. I think that really reflects how well he has played through these first 3 games. I think he's really emerged as Ohio State's top defensive end, whereas going into, camp, it's like, is he even going to be a starter? They brought in Bo Atkinson. And I think Caden Curry has really shown that, he can be an impact player for his defense this year.
Yeah, it seems like Ohio State has had a few of those guys emerge. And this is honestly, it goes back to the way that we ranked them going into the preseason. It's a little bit difficult to do that with this roster, especially considering how many guys they lost from last year. And how many guys we just weren't certain were going to make a significant impact for Ohio State this season. Caden Curry is certainly one of those guys. I remember talking with you, Dan, in the preseason about Caden Curry, sitting in front of the media and somebody asking him basically what it's like to be a starter. Or what it's like to finally be a starter now that JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer were off to the NFL. And we both were like, it kind of feels like Bo Atkinson transferred here to be the starter, and that Caden Curry is the guy of him and Kenyatta Jackson that we're probably going to take a step back and play more of a depth role. But through 3 games, Caden Curry has impressed me each and every week, and he has really established himself as somebody that Ohio State can rely on coming off the edge. He's only, he's one of, I guess, 4 guys who have jumped into the top 20 based on our preseason rankings. The other 3 are Will Kazmarek, Phillip Daniels, and Bo Jackson. Dan, I know you wrote a pretty great feature on Will Kazmarek with some quotes from Keenan Bailey and some of the impact that Will Kazmarek has made in his time at Ohio State. What has put Kazmarek in this spot, and do you expect to see him maybe even rise the rankings further as Ohio State enters into a more crucial part of their schedule?
Yeah, and that latter question is tough because, I know our Josh Paloa made the comment when I first shared these rankings with the staff. It's like, would anyone here have guessed 3 weeks ago that Will Kazmarek would be ahead of Matt Clare right now? And he is. And I think based on what we've seen so far this season, he deserves to be. I mean, he is Ohio State's best blocking tight end. He's one of the best blocking tight ends in the country. And that's why he's 13. For him to rise, the question is going to be, can he be a consistent factor in the passing game? We saw him have the 1 long touchdown against Grambling, but will there be more plays like that? I think that's what it would take for him to rise and really be a top 10 player on this team. And I do think the best is likely yet to come for Max Clare. And I would guess that Max Clare is going to move back up the rankings at some point, because I do think based on what he did at Purdue, he has the potential to make a much bigger impact than he has so far. I think he's gotten better with every game. He's looked more and more comfortable with every game. And so between the 2 tight ends, I think Will Kazmarek's a guy, the 13th place ranking shows it. He's firmly in Ohio State's top 20 players. He's a guy who's going to play a lot of football for his team this year and who they view as a very valuable player. And I think, one of the things that's kind of notable about it is Will Kazmarek jumps in from out of the rankings to 13th. Brandon Inniss goes from 11th to out of the rankings. And I think that kind of shows where this offense is right now, to where I don't think we're going to see as much free receiver stuff with this offense as we have in past years, because I think, frankly, right now, when you talk about the best 11, Will Kazmarek and Max Clare are both in that best 11 on offense, and Brandon Inniss isn't. And that's not to say that Brandon Inniss isn't going to make an impact as the year progresses. I certainly think Brandon Inniss is a guy who could end up in the top 20 once again at some point if he becomes the player we think he can be. But I think right now, Will Kasmarik's a guy, you talk about kind of the skill position players besides the quarterback. He's really number 3 in that pecking order right now behind Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate as somebody who holds a ton of value for this Ohio State offense. And it's because of how good he is as a blocker. I mean, he's really an extension of the offensive line out there with how good he is both as a run blocker and as a pass protector. He adds, for 3 down value, even if he's not making a ton of plays as a receiver. He's capable of that. But even if he's not making a huge impact as a receiver, he's a guy who adds value on every down because of how good of a blocker he is.
Absolutely. And, we've talked about Washington. We've talked about the Buckeye 20, had some fun with it. Now it's time for something that's not always fun as we end this episode of 11 Warriors Live. The last time I asked you for score predictions, you guys both picked Texas to beat Ohio State. Are you guys going to pick Washington to beat Ohio State on this road trip out west? I'll start with you, Andy. What is your score prediction for Saturday's game, Ohio State versus Washington?
Well, I'm having to come up with one on the spot because I really hadn't formulated it in my head as much yet. But I'm going to go with Ohio State 41, Washington, I think 24. 41-24, that's my final. I don't like how high scoring that is because it's just in general, I think Ohio State's going to be a little more methodical with its tempo in this game. Um, but I think they're going to move the ball pretty well against this Washington defense. I expect there to be some explosive plays. I think the reason I went with 41 is because I do expect them to still settle for a couple of red zone field goals. I think some of those issues running the ball consistently once the field condenses stay there. But we'll see on that. I think this is the best offense Ohio State's played so far. I think they're better than Texas on the offensive side of the ball right now. And I think the home crowd, the energy, Washington may be having something to prove. The talent we've talked about, they're going to make some plays on the offensive side of the ball and score a little more than other teams have and will against this really good Ohio State defense. Um, but I don't see it being as consistent as Ohio State's able to do because like it's a really good on that side of the ball. I think Ramsey sent this to me in his score prediction. It's 2 really good offenses, but it's only 1 really good defense. Ohio State's defense will make some stops. Washington's won't as much, and that's where I see the Buckeyes pulling ahead probably in the second half.
Dan, I know your initial prediction was one you made earlier in the week. What was your initial prediction, and has that changed at all as you've kind of started to settle into looking at the Washington game?
Yeah, I'm still vacillating a little bit on it, to be honest. But I this is what I feel like. I think Ohio State's going to finish in the low 30s. I think Washington's going to finish in the low 20s. I've kind of vacillated back and forth on like, does that mean a 31-24 win for Ohio State, or does that mean a 35-21 win? Like those 2 scores, although they're only a few points different, they look very different. But like when I really think about like how the game's going to play out, like this is my thinking. I think Washington's going to score 2 or 3 touchdowns in the first half. I think Ohio State's offense is going to come out a little shaky. Julian Sainz, first road game. I think Washington's going to lead this game at the half, and I think Ohio State's going to take over in the second half. I think Ohio State eventually the talent of Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, all those weapons is going to become too much for Washington's defense, and I think Ohio State's defense – I think we're going to see Ohio State's defense face more adversity in this game than we have in any game so far this year. Because to Andy's point, I think this Washington offense is the best they've faced so far. You're playing on the road. I think we're going to see Washington score a few touchdowns in this game. But I think when the game's on the line in the second half, I think it's going to tighten up. I think Matt Patricia's defense is going to make the plays that it needs to make. So there's still a chance I tweak my score prediction by a few points here or there by the time we get to Saturday. But for right now, I'll stick with the initial one that I sent to Andy, and that's Ohio State 34, Washington 21.
I'm around that score too. I would say that earlier in the week, I was feeling more confident about Ohio State's offense going out there and scoring some points. But as you start to measure the environment that Julian Sainz going to step in for his first start, and some of the struggles that Ohio State had against Ohio, particularly with inside the 20-yard line and in the red zone. I do think that this ends up being a tighter game than most people are going to expect. I have a 31-20 score. That may, as you're saying, Dan, I've kind of gone back and forth. Do I want to go a little bit more points for Ohio State? Do I want to go fewer, more points for Washington? But I do think that there is something to be said about the fact that Ohio State opens up in this game at 13.5, and the spread is now down to 8.5 in Ohio State's favor. The over-under for this game is 51.5, consensus across a bunch of different sports books. This is according to the Action Network. So this is going to be a game that at least the odds makers expect to be tighter than maybe most would expect. And I do think that Ryan Day is kind of predicting that a little bit. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the ways that he was talking about style points in this Tuesday press conference was definitely fascinating to me, that Ohio State just needs to go out and win this game. And I do actually wonder if Ryan Day wouldn't be all that upset with Ohio State trailing at halftime, Dan, because that gives them vital experience that they need to withstand a season that is going to have tougher opponents down the road. They still have Penn State on their schedule. They still have Michigan in the Big House on their schedule. I know that Illinois just got blown out of the water by Indiana, but playing at Illinois is going to be a difficult game. And so all the experiences that Julian Sand can have early in his career as Ohio State's quarterback, I think is something that is going to be of value to him and this Ohio State team. But there you have it. You have a clean scoreboard or a clean graphic across the top with Dan, Andy, and I all picking Ohio State to win in this game. But there's certainly going to be maybe some tweaks and some changes to our scores as the rest of the week unfolds. We have, I guess I can say I have had a lot of fun talking to you guys tonight about the Ohio State Washington game and the Buckeye 20 and things of that nature.
I've been nearly decapitating yourself with your setup.
I think my light just doesn't want to stay in place anymore. That was funny. But it has definitely been a good time. I want to give another shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. It is the official bank of 11 Warriors. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com, and we will be back on the web and maybe even in some video form. We'll see. The rest of this week is wide open for us in coverage for the Ohio State Washington game. And Dan and Andy will be out there in Seattle to cover it for us. This has been another